This is Matt, and these are the vintage vinyl albums for April 2019. The second album from Motorhead is a landmark release for a number of reasons. Overkill was released on Bronze Records, a label which would put out no less than 5 classic Motorhead albums. Overkill was also a lot less punky than their self-titled debut effort, and with some massively improved production to boot. In fact, this might be the first glimpse of what would come to be known as the signature Motorhead sound in general. And what to call the sound? I mean, the label rock and roll is general and safe, but it's certainly been embraced by the heavy metal crowd and largely understood to be just that, despite previous denials from the great Lemmy Kilmister. He actually hated people referring to his band as metal, but the association is utterly unavoidable. They were certainly influential on the genre as a whole. Bands such as Voivod, Megadeth, Slayer, Metallica, and countless other thrash bands routinely cite them. And then there's the band Overkill, who actually named themselves after the title track of this album. But if you ignore all of that and simply listen to the entire Motorhead catalog, it's pretty clear that they're a de facto metal band. Sorry, Lemmy. Overkill was also Motorhead's first album to break into the top 40 of the UK album charts, having managed successful singles for the title track and No Class, 2 songs that were live staples throughout the life of this band. Which means it should come as no surprise that my favorites include No Class, Tear You Down, and most of all, the title track to Overkill.
Don't sweat it! Get it back to you! Overkill! Overkill! Overkill!
Speaking of singles, this is when Motorhead recorded and released their single for the cover song Louie Louie. The song didn't appear on the original release of Overkill, but rather the 1996 CD reissue of the album. Back in the 80s, I got to know this track from its appearance on the 1984 vinyl release of their No Remorse compilation album. Did I mention the album cover is made of leather? Leather. Overkill just recently reached its 40-year anniversary. Unlike a rather large number of its contemporaries, though, Overkill really holds up well, and I definitely consider it high on the list of Motorhead's best. So cheers to the late great Lemmy Kilmister and his fast and filthy cohorts. That's right, I went there. Sacramento's Sentinel Beast released only 1 album in their career, so you might have missed it. But if you did, you've truly deprived yourself of a really solid and heavy thrash album, one that should have gotten more attention than it did. The first notable appearance of this band was on the Metal Massacre 7 compilation album, released by Metal Blade in January 1986. It was the demo version of the track Sentinel Beast, which is good, but lacks some tightness in the performance, something the album version corrects. Sentinel Beast is fronted by Debbie Gunn. Yes, a female thrash metal vocalist, something you weren't hearing in abundance back in the mid-1980s. There were a few women singing for metal bands at the time. Bands such as Girl School, Warlock, and Bitch all come to mind. But Gunn really took it to the next level and belts out aggressive vocals on par with Kreator, Megadeth, and Zetro-era Exodus, but with some melodic elements along the lines of Overkill and Forbidden. It's a formula that works for her and for the band. Standout tracks include their impressively fast cover of Iron Maiden's Phantom of the Opera, a band that is clearly influential on them, as well as the song Sentinel Beast. As mentioned before, there's definitely some Maiden in their sound, with a pinch of then recent Slayer as well, but they have plenty of their own sound to separate them from the utter onslaught of paint-by-numbers thrash bands at the time. I'm sure you can come up with a list of those pretty quickly. The band broke up in 1987, but came back in the late aughts with an EP and a compilation album from 2009 and 2010 respectively. The lineup is Gun, along with much newer members, so if looking for a classic lineup, it's not there. But if that's not important to you, then have at it. There was material in the 80s for a second Sentinel Beast album, but an official release with that lineup never happened. But ex-guitarist Barry Fischel, who plays on Depths of Death, recorded and released that material in 2009 under a project called Fischel's Beast. The album is called Commencement and is comprised of 6 tracks. Like the current Sentinel Beast, Fischel is also the only once Sentinel Beast member on this material as well. As for Depths of Death, it's a true thrash classic. If you missed it the first time around, you should hear it now. It seems like every album released by Motley Crue in the 1980s had a very different sound and style from the others, and their debut album is certainly no exception. Originally released in 1981 on the band's own Leather Records, Too Fast for Love boasted a whopping 900 copies in its first printing. 3 vinyl pressings were issued in total on the original label, including the later dropped Stick to Your Guns, as well as an extended version of the title track. Stick to Your Guns is also significant in that it's the very first Crue single, with Toast to the Town as the B-side. When the band got signed to Elektra Records the following year, the album was remixed and partially re-recorded, as well as subjected to some track order swapping, and then reissued in August of 1982. For those not in the know, and even I didn't know this until years later, the cover art is a clear play off of the Sticky Fingers album from the Rolling Stones. Since I never really got into the Stones, they and their cover art were simply not my world. Favorites include Piece of Your Action, the title track, and especially their one music video song for this album, Live Wire.
Free, little bit better than it used to be, 'cause I'm alive.
Much of the album's tracks were written even before the classic lineup was fully formed. Main songwriter and bassist Nikki Sixx had a number of these songs left over from his previous band, London. A fact more obvious in the credits for Public Enemy No. 1, a song co-written by ex-bandmate Lizzie Gray. You remember Lizzie and London. They were front and center in the 1988 rockumentary The Decline of Western Civilization, Part 2: The Metal Years. A highly recommended movie, by the way. In many ways, this album sounds like a decent demo recording, or maybe a perfect practice session taped in the basement of someone's house. And yes, even the Elektra mix. Some might say that detracts from the recording, but I'm of the mind that it adds a bit of charm and authenticity to it. I like that it's a bit raw, and a wee punkish. It fits the band well, as they too are a bit raw. Read the book for more on that. With the success of their follow-up albums playing a clear role, Too Fast for Love managed to go platinum in 1986. And yeah, they've had a number of successful albums under their belts during their existence. Well, okay, tentative existence, because although they stopped playing shows in 2015, they then recorded new music for that Netflix movie about them. So, who knows? Truth be known, I love this album. It reminds me of jamming with my high school best friend who was a drummer, drinking Jack and chasing girls, and even managed a band who suspiciously looked a whole lot like the Crue, though they'd never admit it. And yeah, this might be the first glam metal album, strictly speaking. Whether you agree or disagree, leave your thoughts in the comments. Let the hairspray and spiked armbands fly. Blind Illusion is one of those bands that might be unknown to some, but are recognized by the metal faithful as having produced a thrash metal classic in their debut album, The Sane Asylum. Originally formed in 1978 by a then 15-year-old Mark Biederman, the band went through numerous members and style changes until the dawn of the Bay Area thrash scene circa 1983, when Blind Illusion basically followed suit. 4 years later, the band got a record deal with Combat and released The Sane Asylum in 1988. Although John Marshall was in the band for a time and then later departed for Metal Church, there are 2 other significant members of this band who are well worth mentioning. Replacing Marshall was none other than ex-Possessed guitarist Larry Lalonde, who brings quite a bit of what made him great on that band's records onto The Sane Asylum. The other notable member of Blind Illusion was bassist Les Claypool. Of course, Some of you are now thinking, Lalonde, Claypool, weren't they in Primus? And yep, you'd be right. Claypool left Blind Illusion halfway through touring to officially form Primus, and then Lalonde joined once Blind Illusion broke up. An even more interesting reunion of sorts when considering that the two bands sound absolutely nothing alike. My favorite track on this album hasn't changed at all since it came out. By far, there is one song above all the others, and it's called Vengeance Is Mine. Apparently the band, or simply Biederman, thought enough of this track to record an updated version of it for their 2018 EP called 2018. Also on the album is a redo of another Sane Asylum track, Metamorphosis of a Monster, as well as 2 new songs. As far as I can see, it's not available on vinyl, but there was a 2015 reissue of the Sane Asylum on gold vinyl, released by World in Sound, that comes with a bonus 7-inch and a poster if interested. The album was produced by Kirk Hammett of Metallica, though uncredited. Production credit in the liner notes goes to Biederman, which is curious, because if any of us had a member of the biggest thrash band on the planet handling the sound of our record, we'd friggin' mention it. We'd love to know why Hammett's name is omitted. If you know, drop a mention in the comments. The overall style played on the Sane Asylum has a definite prog quality, mixed with some hints of jazz and funk, but completely roped in by their thrash metal foundation. Some purists might be closed-minded enough to not give it a chance because of those elements, which is unfortunate because there's some great stuff on this record. Because it doesn't play by the rules, the Sane Asylum often gets overlooked. Criminally overlooked. As for what happened to this band, there was a 2010 release, namely the widely panned Demon Master, and of course the EP mentioned previously. However, Biederman still carries the flag for this band, and an incarnation of them is currently touring with a promise of new music as of 2019. Check out their website at blindillusionofficial.com for more details. It's fair to say that Celtic Frost is a bit of an anomaly. Starting out as Hellhammer and that incarnation's single release of their Apocalyptic Raids EP, it's clear how utterly influential Hellhammer and later Celtic Frost would be on both black and death metal. Not without its glaring flaws, Hellhammer's approach was lo-fi, sophomoric, and on occasion unintentionally humorous. I still have teenage memories of listening to this record with my best friend while tripping on mescaline, both laughing uncontrollably at Warrior's guttural screams on the track, Triumph of Death. Here's what you might have been missing. No doubt because of this type of public reception, founding guitarist and vocalist Tom G. Warrior changed the name to Celtic Frost, as well as steered the sound in what could be argued a more serious, if not equally raw, direction. Okay, so I'm going to admit something here. I was one of those people who used to pronounce this band's name Celtic Frost. But I do have 2 points in my own defense. The first was that, having largely grown up in Massachusetts, my primary reference to the term was through this basketball team, and that's pronounced Celtics. The second was from Warrior himself, who throughout the 1980s and a bit beyond also pronounced it
Celtic Frost,
but has since changed to the traditional version.
Celtic Frost.
Maybe because someone actually called him on it. Ultimately, none of this is too terribly important, but I'm mentioning it anyways. And that brings us to Celtic Frost's debut release, Morbid Tales. Originally released as a 6-song EP in Europe, which is the version I have, it was later released in the US with 2 additional tracks, that is, Dethroned Emperor and Morbid Tales, bringing it to full-length status. Although Into the Crypt of Rays is pretty great, my favorite track in this album is, without a doubt, Return to the Eve.
Dreaming eyes, home to return. As shadows fall, the sword of mouth.
I honestly don't believe that the music journalists of the time really know what to do with this band. Celtic Frost defied quite a few expectations by taking elements of doom, thrash, and hardcore, as well as their proto-death and black metal sounds, and mixing it all up into something completely unexpected, and admittedly not accessible to more mainstream ears. As you can imagine, this is exactly why those who love this band feel the way they do. Morbid Tales is a great start for this band, but my favorite is the next album, To Megatherion, which contains more Celtic Frost classics, such as The Usurper, Jewel Throne, and Circle of the Tyrants. For new listeners, I would totally recommend both albums. So, what can be said about the mighty Ronnie James Dio that hasn't already been said? Having proved himself in two classic bands, Rainbow and Black Sabbath, the question at the time might have been, could the man not only survive on his own, but flourish and become a legend because of it? The answer is found on his fledgling solo effort known as Holy Diver. A lot of folks like to say that Dio, the man, borrowed elements of his past two bands for this project, but I feel that's a little short-sighted, or simply putting the horse before the cart. Ronnie James Dio himself brought musical and lyrical elements to each band he joined. In Sabbath's case, the band changed a bit, in my opinion, for the better. Ronnie's contributions of dramatic and majestic themes, lyrics of power and fantasy, and one heck of a giant vocal delivery massively improve every band he's in. Can you tell I'm a fan? As for Holy Diver, the one bridge you could form between it and the two studio albums he did for Sabbath is a musical decision to get with the times and bring a more modern metal sound to the proceedings. On Holy Diver, Dio has officially joined the 1980s in that respect, and it holds up with the best of that era. He even produced the album himself. Although both Stand Up and Shout and Straight Through the Heart come to mind for preferred songs, there really is no competing with the title track, Holy Diver.
Holy diver, you're the star of the masquerade. No need to look so afraid. Jump, jump, jump on the tiger. You can feel his heart, but you know he's mean. Some like can never be seen. Yeah!
If wanting to hear and see these tracks performed live, Dio did release a DVD called Holy Diver Live, on which they play every single song from that debut album. Check it out. I actually met Ronnie James Dio and members of his band during the Killing the Dragon tour in Montreal, and was utterly floored by his gratitude and affability. I go more into depth on this meeting in both a dedicated episode of MGP Audio Journal, which can be found amongst my Patreon offerings, as well as in the Heaven and Hell episode of my Vintage Vinyl Vivisection podcast, and I would invite you to check out both, as it's a pretty good story. Relating specifically to this album, I'd asked Ronnie for the one song from his entire career that he was utterly tired of performing live. His answer, perhaps surprisingly, was Rainbow in the Dark, a track from Holy Diver. I responded with, "Yeah, but the fans love it." And Dio said, "And that's why I still do it." Yep, he loved his fans that much. Long before that, though, Dio actually did a Budweiser commercial for radio, using music from, or simply reminiscent of, Rainbow in the Dark, but with some lyrical changes. Have a listen. Sadly, we lost Ronnie in 2010 to stomach cancer, but his legacy truly lives on, and I don't mean that just in the hologram form. I know that gets said about other dead rock stars, but in Dio's case, it's by no means hyperbole. Ronnie James Dio gave us over 50 years of music, much of which metal. His influence on the power metal genre is beyond obvious. Tributes, awards, dedications, and countless cover versions of his songs well illustrate his importance to the story of heavy metal. I still find it hard to listen to This Is Your Life without feeling a strange mix of grief and personal motivation. But Dio was a man of contrasts himself, and that conflict was at the center of the lyrics and music he left behind. So honor the man today by putting on this record and cranking it to the max. Oh, and one more thing.
Look out!
Make sure to listen to the Vintage Vinyl Vivisection podcast, as a guest and I focus on a different album every episode. Band facts, production, personal stories, you name it. V3 is one of the 3 public podcasts I produce, all of which can be found at accusationnetwork.com. And now for my classic pick of the month. Released in 1980, Castle Donington, Monsters of Rock features live performances from Rainbow, The Scorpions, Saxon, April Wine, Touch, and Riot, recorded that summer during its namesake festival. There were a couple variants of the cover art. Mine is the US version, with the UK variant looking very different. Still, the tracks are identical, so if you went after both, it would just be for the covers. A few notes here. The lineup for Rainbow here is the one with Graham Bonnet singing, as Ronnie James Dio was already in Black Sabbath at this point. It's nice to see Riot here, though the follow-up album from the one that they were touring had much better material. Only one Saxon track, and it's not from Wheels of Steel, even though that album was already out and had stronger songs. But it's not a total loss by any stretch. Although the Scorpions are the strongest act on the record, with 2 great tracks from Love Drive, the rest of the bands hold their own, and it's a live recording well worth getting.
There is a dark corner where secrets hide. Whether forgotten or seldom noticed, these offbeat details of the past remain, to be found by the curious and the receptive. Strange moments in cultural history is the class you never took in high school. Grab a seat up front and turn off your brain as we fill your head with tales of oddballs, villains, outcasts, flops, and other lesser-known events in this thing we call human existence. Find this and other podcasts at accusationnetwork.com.
In more recent releases, metal fans worth their salt know who Cam Lee is. Although he was in an early incarnation of the band Death, then known as Mantis, I know him much better as having been the frontman for an amazing death metal band known as Massacre. If you've never heard either From Beyond or Inhuman Condition, you need to, as they are true heavyweights of the genre, and actually include 3/4 of the classic 80s lineup of Death. That is, Rick Ross, Terry Butler, and Bill Andrews. And now with this release, you get a 4-song collection of newly recorded versions of classic Massacre demo tape tracks from 1985 and 1986. Lee still provides the vocals here, but the music is performed by Swedish recording engineer and musician Ronnie Bjordstrom. There's certainly an approximation of the original band sound here, though that might be more about the original material than an actual attempt. But it also has a more modern approach throughout. Production isn't as clean as the classic era Massacre, but still very much listenable. Lee and Roz worked together again for a time as Gods of Death, which was somewhat of a Massacre reunion, but that never really saw the light of day. Although there were some issues with Lee using the Massacre name for that project, hence Gods of Death, it appears those issues are over, and he's now secured the rights to the name. So, Massacre is gearing up to go out on tour, and are also writing material for a new album. As for Massacred, it's now available through Nuclear Blast Records. Before I let you go, I just wanted to announce one of my new shows that I'm producing that's of interest to record buyers, and I'm going to guess a few of you are out there. I'm producing a show called The Record Store Report, on which I visit shops in different towns, interview folks who work there, show you where the new arrivals section is, and most importantly, give you a look at their metal bin. Looking forward to doing a number of these, and I think some of you will definitely dig it. And of course, that's brought to you by the Accusation Network. If you enjoy this program on YouTube, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And also hit that notification bell so you can be notified of all the videos that I produce and release. And as always, if you want to be part of the conversation, leave your comments below. I'd love to hear from you and have that conversation. And finally, if you haven't already done so, become a patron of the Accusation Network. Go to patreon.com/The Accusation Network. Check out our reward tiers, including early access to each episode, and see how you can contribute. And as always, See you next month.
Amplify my senses.